bandits broke into mountain woman's cabin. Unaware her dog was a retired military K9. The storm rolled down Granite Ridge like a living thing, grinding against the timberline and burying the world in sheets of white. Wind slammed against the tiny cabin clinging to the mountainside, rattling every window as if trying to warn the woman inside. Nora Hale, 60 years old, and built from the same stubbornness as the Rockies themselves, tightened the wool blanket around her shoulders and listened to the wind howl. But what she heard next was not the wind. A crunch. Then another. Heavy feet forcing their way through snow that came up to the waist of most grown men. Bear noticed before she did. The German shepherd lifted his head from the hearth, ears pricking forward. His body stiffened, muscles coiling one by one with the silent precision of a trained soldier. His eyes had that familiar amber focus Nora had seen many times before, years before this quiet mountain life. That look meant danger was close. She whispered, "Easy, boy." But Bear was already moving. Outside, 3 shadows pushed against the storm. Their breaths steamed through ski masks, their hands trembling from cold, adrenaline, and desperation. The gas station robbery had gone bad, the clerk had hit the silent alarm, and they had fled into the mountains with nothing but a stolen duffel bag and panic pumping through their veins. Evan, the oldest, tried to steady the group. "We lay low here. Old lady, middle of nowhere. She won't fight back." Jax cursed under his breath. "Storm's gonna bury us alive. Get inside before we freeze." Leo, the youngest, only nodded. He looked back over his shoulder every few seconds, like he expected sirens to rise from the trees. Evan raised his boot and drove it into the cabin door. The wood splintered with a crack that seemed too loud for the dead of night. Inside, Nora shot to her feet. But Bear moved first. The 3 intruders spilled into the cabin, shaking snow onto the rug. Their eyes adjusted quickly to the dim lantern glow. It was supposed to be easy. An old woman. 1 cabin. No threat. Then they froze. Bear stood between them and Nora, body lowered, head down, a silent line of warning etched in fur and muscle. His tail didn't wag. His breaths were slow, controlled, like he was counting heartbeats. His gaze locked onto the men with an unsettling intelligence. Jax muttered, "What the hell kind of dog is that?" Nora stepped forward slightly. "Don't move. He reacts to movement." But the men didn't listen. Evan took 1 step to the left. Bear took 1 step forward in perfect sync. Leo lifted his hand as if to gesture. Bear's lips peeled back just enough to show the white edge of his teeth. This was no house pet. Anyone who had seen combat canines knew the stance. The stillness, the calculation. Jack swallowed. "He's military trained." Evan's jaw tightened. "So keep him calm." But Bear wasn't calm. He was assessing, measuring distances, mapping threats. In the glow of the lantern, his shadow stretched across the cabin floor like a warning carved in darkness. Evan lifted both hands slowly. "Look, we just need shelter till morning. That's it." Nora didn't answer. Bear didn't blink. Then a sound sliced through the tension. A metallic click. Jax had pulled a knife from inside his coat, holding it low and behind his leg like he thought no one noticed. Bear noticed. His body shifted barely an inch, but that inch was enough to pull every tendon tight. Nora felt her breath lock in her chest. She could sense it like static in the air. 1 wrong move and Bear would strike. Nora spoke quietly. "Put the knife down, now." But Jack smirked. "Lady, he's just a dog." He moved. Too fast, too careless, too stupid. Bear launched forward with a sound that cut through the cabin like thunder. Not barking, not growling, but the deep, primal roar of a warrior who knew exactly what battle required. Jax tripped backward onto the floor, knife skidding across the wood. Bear stopped just short of his throat, teeth bared inches from skin. The message was clear. If Bear had wanted to tear him open, it would already be done. Evan raised his hands higher. "All right, we get it. Dog's in charge." Jax froze, barely breathing. Leo whispered, "Jesus, he's trained to kill." Nora finally stepped beside Bear, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "He's trained to protect, and he's deciding right now whether any of you deserve a chance." Bear didn't look away from Jax, not even for a heartbeat. But in that moment, something else flickered across his senses. His ears twitched, his head lifted. He sniffed the air, slow and deliberate. Nora felt dread slip down her spine. Bear wasn't reacting to the men anymore. He had caught a scent outside the cabin, a scent he knew, a threat worse than 3 desperate criminals. Evan noticed her expression. "What is it?" Nora didn't answer. She couldn't, because the plot twist came from the storm itself. Outside the ruined door, through the wall of white, she saw a faint red glow sweep across the snow. A targeting laser, but not aimed at her, not aimed at the intruders. It was aimed directly at Bear. Her heart dropped. Someone else had found her cabin, someone who knew exactly who she was, someone who had been hunting her for years. The 3 intruders thought they had broken into the wrong cabin. Nora knew the truth. They weren't the danger. They were merely the beginning. For a few long seconds after Nora saw the red targeting dot slide across Bear's shoulder, no one in the cabin moved. The wind howled through the busted doorway, throwing needles of snow across the floor. Jax still lay under Bear's shadow, chest heaving, eyes wide. Evan and Leo stood frozen mid-breath. The only sound inside was Bear's low, rumbling growl, a sound you felt more in your ribs than in your ears. Then the dot disappeared, swallowed by the storm. Nora's voice snapped through the air. "Everybody back from the door. Now." There was something in her tone that cut through panic and stupidity at the same time. Command, the kind of voice men either obeyed or regretted ignoring. Evan didn't argue. He grabbed Jax's coat sleeve and yanked him toward the center of the cabin. Leo stumbled after them. Bear retreated step by step, walking backward, never taking his eyes off the open doorway. Nora slammed the heavy wooden bar back into place as best she could over the splintered frame, then dragged a steel storage trunk against it to reinforce. Snow still pushed through the cracks, but at least they weren't an open target. Jax finally found his voice. "What the hell was that? Cops don't use lasers like that." "They don't," Nora said. She crossed to the table, hand shaking just enough to make the lantern flame flicker when she adjusted it. Bear moved with her, staying between Nora and the door, his body a shield on 4 legs. Evan watched her carefully. "That laser wasn't for us, was it?" Nora didn't answer right away. She rested her hand on Bear's neck, fingers sinking into the thick fur. For just a second, her shoulders slumped like the weight of 6 years settled there all at once. Then she straightened. "You wanted shelter," she said quietly. "You've got it. What you don't have is time. Whoever's out there isn't here for you. They're here for us." Leo swallowed. "Us who?" She met his eyes. "Me and him." Bear's ears flicked at the word, as if he understood. Jax barked a humorless laugh. "Lady, nobody hikes through a blizzard up a mountain to kill a dog." "You'd be surprised," Nora said. "Sit down." They hesitated, then obeyed, drawn by something they couldn't name. Not respect, not yet. But fear had softened into attention. Evan leaned forward, knuckles white around the back of the chair. "Who are you?" For years Nora had kept the answer locked behind her teeth. Up here she was the woman who traded pelts for coffee, who helped tourists read maps and fixed broken snowmobile engines. The quiet lady with the big, strange dog who lived where the road ended. But the storm outside, the laser sight, the quiet intelligence in Bear's eyes. It was all catching up. There was nowhere left to run. Not from the men out there. Not from herself. She exhaled slowly. "My name," she said, "is Nora Hale. Up here, that's all anyone needs to know. But for 30 years before that, the Pentagon called me something else." Leo frowned. Pentagon? "I was a mission coordinator with a special activities unit under the Department of Defense," she said. "Black operations. The kind they don't list in history books. I built missions that weren't supposed to exist, picked targets that weren't supposed to die, signed off on decisions nobody wanted to own in daylight." Evan's eyes narrowed. "Intel work." "Worse," she said. "Approval." Jax shook his head. "You're telling me this dog is some kind of government weapon too?" Nora looked down at Bear. His gaze was locked on the door, but one ear twisted back toward her voice. "Bear was MARSOC," she said. "Marine Special Operations. Search, assault, protection. He ran with raiders in deserts and cities, through places you've only seen on the news. Breach point first, last one out. He has more combat hours than most platoons." Leo stared at Bear like he was seeing him for the first time. "MARSOC canines don't just retire to some cabin in Montana," Evan said. "They get reassigned, or they don't come home." Nora's jaw tightened. Bear almost didn't. His last deployment was in northern Syria. His handler didn't make it. They called it collateral damage. Bear took shrapnel across his side and kept working another 40 minutes. Found wounded Marines under rubble. Locked on to the shooter who took his handler's life. Took 2 bullets and still brought the guy down. There was a thin white scar tracing Bear's ribs, half hidden by fur. Leo saw it now, like a pale line written across his side. The dog shifted slightly at the memory, as if he felt ghosts' hands in the room. They were going to retire him in a kennel outside Pendleton. Nora said quietly. "One concrete run, one chain-link fence, 30 minutes of sunshine a day until he died. I requested transfer, put my clearance on the line for it. I told them I needed him for a stateside role. Temporary detail. They signed off. Paperwork traveled up the chain. Nobody asked many questions." Evan watched her carefully. "And then you disappeared." "Then I disappeared," she agreed. Jax snorted. "Why, you get tired of all the killing?" She looked at him. Really looked. Under the bravado and the anger, she saw the twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to the duffel bag like it held more than cash, like it held choices he wasn't sure he could live with. "You ever had an order that made your stomach go cold?" she asked him. Jack started to fire back, then shut his mouth. "I had dozens," Nora went on. "Most of them I pushed down, told myself I was serving the flag, protecting people who'd never know my name. But one day they sent us something different." Her voice dropped. The lantern hissed softly, Bear's breathing the steady drum behind her words. "There was a whistleblower," she said. "Civilian logistics contractor. She'd uncovered proof of war crimes, drone strikes they said never happened, kids who were never listed as casualties. She was ready to testify, to hand over everything to an international tribunal. Our job was to make sure she didn't." Leo's face went pale. "You were supposed to kill her." "Yes." "What did she do?" Evan asked quietly. "She taught high school before she took the contractor job," Nora said. "Had a habit of stopping at the same street cart for coffee every morning. Same time, same route. Intel handed me her schedule like a grocery list." She rubbed her thumb along Bear's collar. "I followed her for 2 weeks," Nora said. "Watched her read to kids in a community center after work. Watched her argue with some colonel in a parking lot about blown budgets and ghost contracts. Watched her cry in her car and go back into work anyway. She wasn't a terrorist. She wasn't a threat to our people. She was just someone who found the truth and refused to bury it. So you let her go? Evan said. I let her live, Nora corrected. And then I lied. I filed a report that said she died in a traffic accident. No foul play. No investigation. Clean. Bear's tail gave one single, quiet flick, as if he could hear the guilt in her voice. It bought her 6 months, Nora said. She went public, just like they were afraid she would. Testimony, documents, names. The story hit the wrong desk. People realized someone in our chain had gone off script. They pulled communications, they backtraced the op, and they found me. Leo leaned in. These guys outside, they're from your old unit? No, Nora said. My unit doesn't exist on paper anymore, but the people who used it, the ones who liked having deniable assets and people like me to pull strings, they exist. Some of them American, some of them not. They don't share flags, they share secrets, and they don't forgive disobedience. Evan's gaze dropped to Bear. And he was with you when you disappeared. Bear was listed as transferred to a training facility, she said. On paper, he aged out last year and was euthanized. In reality, I drove him north, took back roads and cash stations until the map looked empty. Bought this cabin from a logger who wanted to move to Florida and forget winter existed. I've been off the grid for 6 years. Jack swallowed hard. So whoever's out there has been looking for you this whole time. Nora nodded once. They probably picked up something small. Supply run, a name overheard. And then tonight they saw your robbery on the news. 3 idiots running into the same mountains where a woman with no digital footprint buys coffee twice a year and trades pelts for fuel. It doesn't take much if you know where to look. Leo looked towards the door, then back at her, something like respect starting to bleed through his fear. We thought we hit the jackpot, he whispered. Remote cabin, 1 old lady, 1 dog. Hide until the storm passes, head for the border. You picked the one cabin on this mountain that has a history classified above your pay grade. Nora said. Congratulations. Evan clenched his jaw. So what? They're just going to light this place up? Kill all of us? Roll it up as an avalanche? Nora shook her head. No, they're hunters, not butchers. They'll want confirmation. A body they can photograph. A dog they can tag and test. They'll do it clean, and they'll make it look like you died trying to rob the wrong place. Jax shot to his feet. Screw that. I didn't sign up to get assassinated over some war story. Bear moved instantly, 1 step forward, weight shifting, eyes locked on Jax. He didn't growl this time. He didn't have to. Jax froze like he'd run into a wall. Nora's voice was steady. You 3 broke into my house with a gun and a bag of stolen money. Bear still hasn't ripped your throat out. You know why? Leo shook his head. Because he's waiting to see what you choose, she said. That's the thing about K9s. They read people better than people read themselves. They know the difference between scared and dangerous, between guilty and gone too far. Bear looked from Jax to Evan to Leo, eyes bright, ears pricked. It felt less like a dog evaluating strangers and more like a veteran measuring who he'd trust in a firefight. Evan swallowed, then asked the question that had been circling all along. What now? Nora looked around the small cabin that had been her whole world for 6 quiet years. The shelves of canned food, the worn maps on the wall, the wood stove where Bear slept with his paws twitching through old missions in his dreams. All of it felt suddenly temporary. We wait for them to make the next move, she said, and then we decide if we're prey or if we're something else. Leo frowned. What else is there? She rested her hand on Bear's shoulder. He leaned into it, just enough to say he was listening. Bandits broke into the wrong cabin tonight, Nora said. You thought that was your mistake? She nodded toward the door, toward the storm, toward the invisible sights tracking somewhere out there. But it might be theirs. The storm closed around the cabin like a fist. By dawn, the snowdrifts had swallowed Nora's porch rails. The wind had carved white walls along the trees, and every escape route had vanished under 6 feet of powder. Even if any of them had wanted to leave, the mountain had made the choice for them. Inside, the lantern hissed softly. The cabin warmed, but tension clung to the air like moisture on cold glass. Bear patrolled the perimeter with the discipline of an old soldier returning to duty. Every few minutes he circled the cabin, nose working the floorboards, checking windows, pausing at the front door to tilt his head as if calculating distance, scent, threat levels. His movements were quiet and precise. He wasn't pacing because he was restless. He was doing a sweep. Leo watched him with both fear and fascination. "Does he always do that?" he asked quietly. Nora was reinforcing a window with boards she'd kept stored for winter storms. She didn't look up. "He's assessing, waiting to see if we're compromised." Evan frowned. "We're not exactly a special forces team he needs to protect." Nora set her hammer down and finally met his eyes. "He doesn't protect teams, he protects his people. If he's doing full reconnaissance, it means he's decided something about you." Leo swallowed, looking at the shepherd who now stood at the back door, ears stiff, tail low, muscles still. What did he decide? Nora gave a small, tired smile. "That you're worth keeping alive. For now." Jack scoffed but didn't argue. His shirt was still torn from where Bear had nearly tackled him earlier. Every time the dog passed near him, he stiffened like someone holding a match too close to gasoline. Eventually, Bear finished his sweep and returned to Nora's side. She crouched, checked his paws for ice, brushed snow grains from his fur with a tenderness that didn't match her hard eyes. "Good boy," she whispered. The dog leaned gently into her leg. Not needy, not soft, just familiar, like two veterans acknowledging each other's ghosts. Evan watched the interaction. "You treat him like he's human." "No," Nora said, still brushing Bear's fur. "I treat him like he's family. Humans don't always earn that." Leo sat on the edge of the bed, the only clean place left he had dared to sit on. He studied Nora for a long moment before asking, "How did you two meet?" Nora hesitated, her hand stilled on Bear's neck. "It wasn't on a mission," she said. "Not a real one. I was visiting a recovery kennel outside Camp Pendleton, evaluating K9s returning from deployment. Most of them were anxious, sick, traumatized. Some couldn't even walk straight from nerve damage." Her voice faded a little as the memory surfaced. But Bear was different. He was lying in the last run, refusing food, refusing handlers, refusing to move. They said he'd given up after his partner was killed. I sat outside his cage for 3 hours, saying nothing. When I finally stood to leave, he got up and followed me. Leo's eyebrows rose. "He just chose you." "No," Nora said softly. "He chose to live. I was just the road he walked back on." The room fell quiet. Even Jack's didn't have a comeback. Bear shifted, hearing something outside that no one else could. His tail straightened, not wagging but alert. Nora's hand dropped to rest on his collar. "What is it?" Evan whispered. Bear didn't growl. He didn't bark. Instead, he walked to the window and stared through the frost as if watching something move deep in the storm. Nora followed his gaze, but saw nothing. "Still out there," she murmured. Leo hugged his jacket tighter. "You really think they'll come in this weather?" "For them?" Nora said. "The storm is a tool." Jax rubbed his face, pacing the cabin like a caged wolf. "This is insane. We're trapped up here with someone hunting you and your killing machine dog." Bear slowly turned his head toward Jax at the word machine. The shepherd didn't show teeth, didn't move an inch, yet something in his stillness made Jax take 2 steps backward. Evan intervened. "Jax, sit down before the dog decides you're not worth the oxygen in this room." Nora exhaled quietly. "He's not a machine. He's trained to recognize intent. And you? You're broadcasting like a broken antenna." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're scared enough to make mistakes," she said. "And mistakes get people killed." Bear walked away from Jax and resumed his patrol. As he passed Leo, something unexpected happened. The dog paused, looked at him, really looked. Then he nudged Leo's hand with his nose. Leo froze, startled. He's being friendly. He's reading you," Nora said. "And he's decided you're not a threat." Leo swallowed hard. "He's incredible." Nora didn't respond immediately. She watched Bear settle by the stove again, one ear turned towards the door, always listening. "Bear saved 7 Marines in Syria," she said quietly. "Another 3 in northern Iraq. He survived 2 IED blasts, dragged his wounded handler into cover during a firefight, and when command stripped him of his unit and locked him in a concrete pen, he still didn't lose faith in people. That's what makes him incredible." Leo looked at the dog with something close to awe. "You said his handler died. Did Bear see it happen?" "Yes," Nora replied. "And some wounds never heal, not even for animals." The weight of her words hung in the cabin. Outside, the storm screamed across the ridge. Inside, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginnings of something that felt unfamiliar in a room full of strangers. Understanding. Evan finally sat down beside Leo. "Nora, if they came for you, why haven't they just hit the cabin already? Why wait?" "Because they want confirmation," she said, "and because they're watching us." Leo's breath hitched. "Right now." Bear lifted his head again, nose twitching, ears pricked forward with absolute focus. Nora nodded. "I'd bet my life there's someone 50 yards out in the trees right now, watching us, waiting for the right moment." "And what moment is that?" Evan asked. Nora stroked Bear's shoulder, grounding both of them. "When we separate, when fear makes someone run, when the weakest link tries to save themselves." Jax muttered, "Not happening." But Nora wasn't looking at him. Her gaze locked on the window, on the faint outline of the tree line where the storm swirled just a little too unnaturally, like shapes moved where wind alone shouldn't. Leo whispered, "What do we do?" Bear answered first. He stood up, walked to the door, and positioned himself squarely facing it. His posture was unmistakable. Protection stance. The stance of a soldier defending his unit. Nora felt a lump rise in her throat. "We stay together," she finally said. "We wait, we watch, and we remember something." "What?" Evan asked. "That Bear isn't just a dog from the past," she said. "He's the only reason we might have a future." A sudden thump hit the roof, heavy enough to shake snow loose from the rafters. Bear's growl rolled through the cabin. Everyone froze. Leo whispered, "What was that?" Nora didn't break eye contact with the ceiling. "That," she said, "means the game just changed." And Bear moved first. By mid-morning the storm eased, thinning into a mist that clung to the pines like smoke after a battlefield. Light filtered through the frost-crusted windows, revealing the wreck the night had made of Nora's cabin. The 3 intruders were restless, whispering in corners, trying and failing to hide the fear written across their faces. Bear was the only steady thing in the room. He sat by the door, eyes locked forward, every sense tuned like a weapon. Nora pulled on her coat. Evan stepped forward. "Where are you going?" to see what the storm left behind. You mean who? Nora didn't deny it. She opened the door just wide enough for her and Bear to step out. The cold slapped her skin like wet iron. Bear moved first, paws silent on the fresh snow, his breath puffing in steady bursts as he swept the perimeter. What she saw turned her stomach to stone. Tracks circling the cabin. Not random. Not tentative. Patterned. Someone had been moving around the cabin all night, knowing exactly where to stand to stay out of the lamplight. Footsteps angled behind the fallen pine, where the roofline created a blind spot. A second pair leading to the ridge where a clean shot through the window was possible. Nora dropped to one knee beside the nearest track, brushing her fingers lightly over the compacted snow. The stride length, the depth, the placement. Someone trained, someone methodical. Bear let out a low grumble from his chest. Yeah, Nora whispered. I know who it is. She scanned the tree line again. No movement. But this type of man didn't need to be seen to be present. She stood, breath tight. It's not the dog they're after. It's me. Bear pressed against her leg, sensing the shift in her pulse. Evan's voice came from the doorway. What did you find? Nora walked back inside, shutting the door behind her. When she spoke, her voice was steady but stripped of any illusion. He's here. Leo blinked. Who? Rudolph Carson. Jax frowned. That's supposed to mean something to us? It should make your blood run cold. Nora said, because he's the kind of man who doesn't miss, doesn't fail, and doesn't leave witnesses. Leo paled. He's hunting you? Yes. Evan folded his arms. Why? Nora didn't answer immediately. She moved around the cabin, checking boards, adjusting curtains, instinctively securing the space. Bear followed seamlessly, mirroring every turn, every pause, as if the two shared the same spine. Finally, she stopped. Carson and I worked together years ago. Intelligence work for an operation that isn't in any official database, a black campaign run out of Eastern Europe. Evan watched her carefully. What kind of operation? The kind where nobody wears a flag. The kind where if you die, your family gets told you slipped on a sidewalk. Jax muttered. Hell of a job description. Nora continued. We were assigned to track a rogue financier funneling weapons to insurgent groups. It was supposed to be simple. Surveillance, identification, extraction. You said supposed to be, Evan said. It became something else. It turned into a cleanup mission. They wanted the financier eliminated, then everyone he'd dealt with, his family, his staff, anyone tied to his money. Carson didn't hesitate. He enjoyed the work. Leo's voice was quiet. And you didn't. I followed orders, Nora said, until the day the line moved too far. The operation ended with a village burning. It wasn't insurgents. It wasn't enemy combatants. It was the financier's safe house. Women, kids, people who didn't even know his name. Her jaw flexed as the memory resurfaced like a bruise pressed too hard. Carson called it efficient. She whispered. I called it murder. Jax frowned. So you turned on him? No, I walked away. Filed a dissenting report. Refused to endorse the official version. Someone up the chain erased my testimony. Then Carson was ordered to deal with the problem. Meaning you? Evan said. Nora nodded. I survived. Barely. Bear saved me that night. Dragged me through 3 miles of forest while I bled into the snow. After that, I vanished. 6 years. No digital footprint, no trail. Leo rubbed his face. So how did he find you now? Nora looked at the duffel bag of stolen bills sitting by the bed. You did it for him. Jax stiffened. We didn't know. You didn't need to, she said. Your robbery hit statewide alerts. Troopers chased you into the mountains. Somebody in the right network noticed the location. A cabin off the grid. A name that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a hard leap. Leo exhaled shakily. We brought him right to your door. Nora didn't soften the truth. Yes. Evan sat heavily on a chair, face pale as the snow outside. So what now? He's alone out there? No, Nora said. Carson never travels alone. He always brings a spotter, maybe two, enough to box a target in. And the storm? Leo asked. For him it's cover, noise. Blowing snow hides movement and muffles sound. He waited all night to see who came in and out of the cabin. Now he knows I'm not alone. He'll adjust. Jax paced the room, panic edging his voice. Adjust how? By making us break. Nora answered. He doesn't rush. He creates fear, confusion, doubt. He'll try to make one of you panic enough to run outside. One less person to fight later. Bear suddenly moved to the back window and planted himself there. His posture sharpened. Ears straight, tail stiff. Nora froze. What is it? Evan whispered. Bear didn't bark, but the sound that rumbled out of him, deep, primal, ancient, sent every hair on Nora's neck standing. She stepped toward the window and peered through the glass. At first she saw nothing. Then something flickered between the trees. A shadow, a shape half hidden in the storm. A man standing perfectly still, watching the cabin. He was too far for details, but his stillness was unmistakable. Carson didn't move like prey. He moved like a sniper waiting for wind to shift. Nora whispered, He's closer than I thought. Leo trembled. He's staring right at us, isn't he? Yes, Nora said. And he's calculating. He's deciding who goes first. Bear stepped in front of her, blocking her body with his. Jax whispered, Why isn't he shooting? Nora didn't look away from the figure. Because he doesn't want me dead. Not yet. Carson kills for purpose, not anger. He'll take out the weakest link first to set the stage. Fear makes the next shot easier. Who's the weakest? Leo asked. Before Nora could answer, Bear abruptly lunged to the side window. His claws scraped the floorboards. He pressed his head against the frame, growling louder. Nora rushed to him, heart pounding. What is it? Show me! Bear's nose slammed into the lower corner of the window. Then a single object thudded softly against the glass from outside. A glove, a black tactical glove, pinned to the window with a hunting knife. Evan stepped back, eyes wide. That's a message. No, Nora said, blood going cold. That's bait. Jax shook his head. For who? Nora stared at the knife, at the small strip of fabric tied around the handle. A strip she recognized instantly. It belonged to her old field jacket, the one she'd burned 6 years ago. Her voice broke into a whisper. He's telling me he got here days before the storm. He's telling me he's been close enough to touch my things. Leo stumbled backward. He's inside the perimeter. He could be anywhere. Nora backed away from the window, eyes locked on the glove. No, she said. He's exactly where he wants to be. Evan swallowed hard. Which is where? Nora turned toward them, expression hardening into steel. Close enough to kill us all the moment we make a mistake. Night fell hard over Granite Ridge, heavier than the storm itself. The sky turned the color of bruised steel, the wind dropping just enough for sound to travel. Inside the cabin, everyone was awake. Nobody spoke. Nobody slept. Even the fire seemed to burn quietly, as if afraid to draw attention. Bear lay near the front door, his body low, muscles trembling with a tension that was almost human. His nose twitched every few seconds. He was tracking something outside, something close. Nora felt it too. Midnight came like a blade. A single red dot slid across the far wall, slow, deliberate, bright enough to stain the wood like blood. Jax cursed, stumbling back. Leo sank to his knees. Evan grabbed Nora's arm, voice barely a breath. He has a clear shot. No, Nora said. If he wanted one of you dead, you already would be. The laser drifted upward, paused on the window, then flicked once like a blink. A signal. A second later, a metallic click echoed from outside. Then a distorted voice crackled through a loudspeaker, flat and cold as a morgue drawer. Nora Hale. Evan froze. He knows your name. He's always known. Nora whispered. The voice came again, clear despite the distance. At dawn you walk out, alone, no weapon, no dog. Bear rose instantly, hackles flaring, a low growl vibrating the floorboards. The voice continued, almost conversational. You come to me, and I let the boys go. They limp away with their stolen money, and this night becomes a ghost story they tell each other in prison. Leo swallowed. He's lying. Right? Nora shook her head. Her eyes had gone hollow. Carson doesn't lie about blood. Outside, the loudspeaker popped again. But if you refuse... The laser swept across the window and landed on Bear's chest. I start with the dog. Bear snarled, teeth flashing. He lunged toward the door, but Nora caught him, both hands gripping his collar. He trembled with fury, but he stayed. Barely. Carson's voice went on, cold as the snow around them. I put a round through his heart. Then I take my time with your guests. The loud one first, the kid last. Jack staggered back into a chair. He's talking about killing us like it's nothing. To him it is nothing, Nora said. Evan stared at her. What does he want with you? Revenge? No, Nora answered. Completion. Leo whispered. What does that mean? It means he thinks letting me live 6 years ago was an unfinished mission, and he doesn't leave things unfinished. Outside, the speaker crackled with static again. Nora, be ready when the sun touches the ridge. I want you alive enough to regret the last 6 years, and I want the dog dead enough to prove a point. A long pause. Your choice. Then silence. The wind moved again. The forest shifted. But Carson's presence felt rooted in every tree, every shadow, every breath leaking through the cracks of the cabin. Nora released Bear slowly. He circled the room twice, pacing, snout low, tail stiff. Not anxious, tactical, the way he used to operate in compound clearings overseas. Every muscle in him screamed readiness. Leo watched him with trembling reverence. He knows what's happening, Leo whispered, like he understands the words. He understands the tone, Nora said, the smell of violence, and he knows Carson. Evan frowned. How would a dog know him? Nora didn't answer immediately. She stepped to the window, keeping her body low, peering through the smallest sliver of frost. Carson trained with one of the Marsoc handlers. Same techniques, same scent markers, same posture. Bear's picking it up. Bear stopped pacing and came to stand beside her, pressing against her leg. His eyes were fixed on the darkness outside, drilling through the trees as if he could see the shape of the threat hidden there. Jack suddenly stood. We need to run. Now. Storm's cleared. Maybe we can make the ridge. There's a service cabin 5 miles south. You won't make half a mile, Nora cut in. He'll pick you off through the trees. You're saying we're just trapped. I'm saying he has every angle covered. Evan stepped forward. Then what do we do? Nora looked at the 3 young men, the thief with a conscience, the hothead who hid fear under rage, the leader barely holding himself together, and knew, in a sudden, heavy truth, that none of this was their fault. Their robbery had been foolish, desperate, reckless, yes, but they were not the monsters she had run from. She took a long breath. He wants me, she said quietly. Only me. He'll keep his word. Leo's head snapped up. You can't go out there. Jack shook his head violently. That's suicide. Evan's voice cracked. Nora, don't! Bear moved in front of Nora, blocking her as if he could sense her decision forming. his body planted like a wall between her and death. She rested one hand on his shoulder. He leaned harder into her palm, refusing to budge. Nora closed her eyes. "Bear," she whispered. "Look at me." It took him a moment, but he turned. Slowly, reluctantly, as if some part of him already knew what she would say. "You saved my life once," she said. "Tonight, I have to save yours." Bear let out a sound she had only heard twice before. Not a growl, not a bark, something closer to grief, low and rough and human in its ache. Evan shook his head. "He'll kill you the second you step outside." "That's the point," Nora said. "No," Leo said. "No, you don't get to throw yourself away." She looked at him with a calm so still it hurt to see. "You three don't deserve to die for my past." Jack scoffed. "You seriously think he's letting us walk away?" Nora nodded. "Carson keeps his bargains. That's what makes him a nightmare. He believes he's honorable. He'll kill me cleanly and let the rest of you limp down the mountain. He gets closure. You get your lives. Everyone wins." Bear snapped his jaws sharply, the closest he ever came to shouting. Nora knelt in front of him, forehead touching his. "I won't let him hurt you again," she whispered. "Not after everything you survived." Bear's breathing hitched. His eyes were bright, fierce, resistant. He nudged her once, hard, as if pushing the idea out of her. But the decision was already carved in her. She stood, grabbed her coat, and walked to the door. Evan's voice cracked. "Nora, don't do this." "That man out there," she said, hand on the latch. "He'll tear this cabin apart piece by piece if I don't end it." "And what about Bear?" Leo asked. Nora looked at the dog one last time. "He'll live, and he'll watch the ridge at dawn, and he'll know I did it for him." The red laser appeared again across the window, waiting, like a promise. Nora sighed. "When the sun rises," she said quietly, "I walk out alone." Bear lunged towards her, trying to block the door, but she closed it before he reached her. Inside the cabin, the young men stared at the sealed door, the silence suffocating them. But outside, in the blizzard's thinning veil, Carson watched the cabin with a sniper's patience, waiting for dawn, waiting for Nora, waiting to finish what he started. The moment Nora shut the door behind her, Bear threw his full weight against it, claws scraping the wood, breath sharp with panic. Evan grabbed his collar, barely holding him back as the dog thrashed, teeth bared, and eyes blazing with a fury none of them had ever seen. Leo's voice cracked. "He knows she's going to die out there." Jax cursed, pacing. "We are not letting her walk into a bullet." Evan looked at the younger two, then at Bear, and then at the door. The decision that formed in his eyes was reckless, dangerous, and absolute. She's not doing this alone. Nora outside took 3 steps into the snow before the door behind her flew open. "Get back inside," she hissed. "Now!" Evan marched out into the cold, jaw tight. Jax and Leo followed, Bear barreling through the gap, planting himself in front of Nora with a low, angry growl. Evan didn't flinch. "You're not sacrificing yourself for us." Nora froze. She had been ready for fear, pleading, panic, anything but this sudden, stupid loyalty. "You don't understand what he is." "Oh, we understand." Jack snapped. "He's a psychopath with a gun, and we're already dead if we do nothing." Leo lifted the stolen shotgun, hands shaking but eyes firm. "We help you. End of discussion." Nora stared at them. 3 criminals, 3 strangers, and they were choosing to walk toward death with her instead of running. Bear stepped closer to her, pressing his body against her leg, forcing her to feel the warmth and weight of him. A reminder, a refusal. Nora exhaled sharply. "All of you inside. If we're doing this, we do it without freezing to death. Back in the cabin, tension ignited into purpose. Evan cleared the table, pushing maps, canned goods, tools aside. We need a plan. Nora slammed her hand on the wood. There is no plan that saves all of you. Bear padded to her side, sitting tall, alert. His ears flicked, his breathing steadied. He sensed the shift. His teammate was assembling a mission. Evan leaned across the table. Let me rephrase. There is no plan unless you make one. She glared, but he didn't back down. Jax pointed to the window. What if we force him to show himself? Leo added. We bait him. Nora shook her head. He doesn't take bait. Evan smirked. But he takes you. The room went quiet. Nora closed her eyes. You're suggesting I step out again, and hope he fires? Not hope, Evan said. Expect it. Leo paced. If Nora goes out like she's giving up, Carson will adjust. He'll move position to get the clean shot. That's when we hit him. Evan looked at Bear. And the dog? Nora answered without hesitation. Bear creates chaos. Bear's ears perked. He understood that word. He stood. Jax frowned. You're telling me this dog can take orders in a firefight? Not take, Nora said. Execute. She knelt beside Bear, hands on his shoulders. He knows 37 silent commands. Every one of them built to breach, flank, distract, or neutralize. All I need is one. Leo stared, stunned. You can actually tell him to attack without speaking? Yes. Evan rubbed his jaw. Okay, so she walks out. Bear hits from the blind side. Jax and I circle the flank. Leo provides fire from here. Nora shook her head sharply. It's not enough. Carson has a partner somewhere, maybe two. We deal with Carson first, Evan said. Cut off the head. Nora clenched her fists. You don't know him. When he sees Bear move, he'll shoot the dog first. The words cut into the room like glass. Leo whispered, Then we protect Bear. They looked at Nora, waiting for the impossible. After several breaths, she finally nodded. Bear will stay hidden behind the storage shed until I give the signal. Not a sound until then. Bear let out a low rumble of acknowledgement. Evan pointed at Jax. We take the ridge while the line of sight is on Nora. He won't be expecting two angles. Jax cracked his knuckles. Finally doing something instead of waiting to die. Leo stepped to the window, shotgun in hand. He looked smaller than ever, but his voice was steady. I'll watch the door. If his partner shows, I slow him down. Nora held up a hand. Listen to me. Carson is precise, methodical. The second he senses something off, he won't waste bullets. He'll fall back, reposition, and gut us clean. Evan nodded. So we give him something perfect, something he believes. Nora exhaled, feeling the weight of a choice that was no longer hers alone. Then this is how it happens. At dawn I walk out like I'm surrendering, hands up, slow, controlled. Bear growled. I will give Bear the silent signal. Nora said. Palm down, sharp circle, he knows it. Leo watched the dog. He understands all this, doesn't he? Yes. Bear's eyes were locked on Nora, pupils sharp, breath low, body vibrating with readiness. He was built for this, forged in this, but she hated using him like the weapon he had been trained to be. Evan pointed at the cabin door. When you call it, we move, you distract him. Bear throws his flank off. I take the shot. Jax drops his spotter. Nora hesitated. There's one more thing. Everyone looked at her. When I walk out, Carson will expect Bear with me. If Bear stays hidden, Carson may hesitate. He'll think something's wrong. Jax shrugged. Good. We want him off balance. No, Nora said. We want him confident. Leo frowned. Why? Because a confident man exposes himself. The room absorbed her words. Finally, Evan leaned back. Damn, You really were in this world. Nora said nothing. They didn't have hours. They barely had minutes. The horizon already carried the faintest smear of light. Dawn was coming. She turned to Bear. He stood, perfect posture, tail low, chest forward. He looked like he had stepped straight out of his Marsoc days. Nora's throat tightened. You follow my voice, my hand, nothing else. Bear climbed onto the cot beside her, placing his head against her chest for a brief second. A grounding touch, a memory, a promise. Nora closed her eyes. You saved me once. Now we save them. Bear pulled back, eyes locked on hers, ready. Evan grabbed his rifle. Jax loaded the pistol he'd stolen. Leo braced the shotgun against the window frame. 3 criminals. A retired K-9, a burned intelligence officer, and 1 monster waiting in the trees. Nora stepped to the door. The first grey light touched the ridge. It's time, she whispered. Bear moved with her, and the mountain held its breath. Dawn broke like a blade, splitting the horizon. A thin line of pale gold crept across the snowfields, turning the frozen world sharp and unforgiving. Nora stepped out first, moving slowly, hands raised, breath forming ghosts in the air. Bear was nowhere in sight, buried in the snowdrifts behind the storage shed, invisible until summoned. Evan and Jax maneuvered silently along the ridge to the east, using a shallow depression for cover. Leo braced at the cabin window, shotgun ready, one eye fixed on Nora's silhouette. For a moment, everything was still. Then Rudolph Carson appeared. He walked out from behind the trunk of a dead pine about 70 yards away, rifle slung low, confidence radiating off him like heat. The rising sun cut across his face, revealing a smirk that chilled Nora deeper than the mountain air. You made the right choice, he called out. A clean end is better than dragging this out. Nora didn't answer. She let her shoulders sag just enough to sell fear. She let her gaze drop to the snow. She let him believe he had already won. Rudolph tightened his grip on the rifle. That's close enough, he said. On your knees. Nora took one slow step back. A deliberate step. A signal. Behind the shed, Bear's ears lifted. Rudolph raised his rifle, and the mountain exploded. Bear erupted from the snow like a living missile, 100 pounds of trained muscle streaking toward Rudolph's right flank with terrifying speed. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He moved with the silent, lethal precision of a dog who had once torn through enemy lines in Helmand Province. Rudolph barely had time to turn. Bear hit him full force in the shoulder, knocking him sideways, ripping the rifle from his hands. Gunfire cracked from the tree line. 2 silhouettes appeared behind Rudolph, hired mercenaries, rifles raised. Jax's voice rang over the ridge. Contact left. He and Evan opened fire from their flanking position. Snow exploded in bursts around them as they returned fire. 1 merc dropped instantly. The other pivoted, firing wildly at Nora. Leo shouted from the cabin window, Nora, down! She dove, snow spraying around her as the bullet ripped past her head. Leo didn't hesitate. He fired once. The slug hit the merc's thigh, spinning him sideways. Evan finished the job with a quick shot across the ridge. Evan shouted over the chaos, 1 left! The final merc was hidden 20 yards up the slope, almost impossible to see, until Bear's sudden attack on Rudolph gave him away. The hidden man shifted to get a clean shot at Bear. Nora saw the muzzle flash forming. She didn't think. She ran. But Leo was faster. The young man fired through the cabin window again, hitting the merc in the shoulder and knocking him off balance. Jax took him down moments later. Bear kept Rudolph pinned with a snarl so deep the snow trembled under Nora's boots. Rudolph thrashed under him, reaching for the knife at his belt, but Bear slammed his weight forward, jaws snapping inches from Rudolph's throat. Bear! Nora commanded sharply. Bear didn't release, but he froze, muscles locked, eyes blazing. Waiting. Rudolph coughed, spitting blood into the snow. You trained him too well. Better than you, Nora replied. A final shot rang out behind them. Nora whipped around, heart seizing, until she saw Evan lower his rifle. A mercenary who had only been wounded was now fully neutralized. Evan grimaced, clutching his left arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "You hit!" Nora called. He shrugged hard. "Just clipped. I'll cry about it later." Leo rushed out of the cabin, slipping on the ice but keeping control of his shotgun. He skidded beside Nora, chest heaving. "You alive?" "Thanks to you," Nora said. She meant it. A faint groan made them turn. Jax slid down the ridge, landing hard, but alive. "Clear," he announced. "All down." Nora stepped toward Bear. The dog's body was rigid, vibrating with controlled aggression. Rudolph lay beneath him, pale and furious, face half buried in the snow. His voice broke into a bitter laugh. "So this is how it ends?" "No," Nora said. "This is how it stops." Rudolph sneered. "You always were sentimental. That's why you lost everything." "Sentimental doesn't mean weak. And what do you think you've gained, Nora Hale? These boys? That mutt? They can't save you." Nora didn't share her answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she gave Bear the gentlest signal she had. A single touch on his neck. Bear stepped back, but kept his body angled between Nora and Rudolph. Jax approached with rope. "Tie him." Nora nodded. Hands behind his back. Tight. Rudolph glared at all of them. "You think you've won, but you're still trapped on this mountain. No one is coming for you." Evan wiped blood from his chin. "Good. Saves us the trouble of running." Leo looked at Nora. "What now?" Nora stared down at Rudolph, the man who had hunted her across borders, through shadows, across years of silence. She felt no triumph, just an ending long overdue. "We end this here," she said, "and we do it clean." Bear stood beside her, chest rising and falling, steam curling from his breath like smoke from a furnace. He didn't look like a pet. He looked like what he truly was, a soldier, a protector, a veteran with instincts honed by war and loyalty forged in fire. Evan limped beside them. "You were right," he said quietly. "A confident man exposes himself." Nora nodded, and a cornered one runs out of places to hide. They stood over Rudolph Carson together, the battlefield still echoing with the last gunshot. 90 seconds. That was all it took. 90 seconds to flip the hunt. 90 seconds to change the fate of 4 strangers and the dog that bound them. The sun rose fully now, lighting the ridge in molten gold. Bear stepped forward, nose brushing Nora's hand, as if asking for the next command. She looked down at him. "We're not finished yet," she whispered. And the mountain held its breath once more. Snow still drifted in thin sheets across the clearing, settling over the aftermath like a slow exhale. Rudolph lay pinned to the ground, wrists zip-tied, breath steaming with rage and disbelief. Evan stood nearby with a rifle low but ready, a thin line of blood sliding down his forearm where a bullet had grazed him. Jax kept watch on the tree line. Leo steadied Nora, who looked like someone walking out of a burning house without knowing what came next. Bear was the only one who seemed completely calm. The big shepherd sat squarely beside Rudolph like a stone guardian, chest rising slow and steady, eyes fixed on the man who had hunted Nora halfway across the continent. Every few seconds Bear would shift his weight, making sure Rudolph remembered exactly who had taken him down. Nora knelt in the snow, wrapped her arms around herself, and looked at the 3 men who had risked everything for her. They expected fear, maybe guilt, maybe a desperate plan to run again. Instead, Nora looked strangely steady. Leo was the first to speak. He wiped the frost from his lashes and asked, not unkindly, "What now, Nora? What now is that I stop this?" she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm done running." Evan exchanged a glance with Jax. They had seen that look before in war zones and collapsed cities. The look someone had when the fight was no longer out there, but inside themselves. Nora stepped toward Rudolph. He spat blood toward her boot, missing by inches. "You think turning yourself in will change anything?" He snarled. "You were the smartest one in the room, and you threw it away." Nora crouched eye level with him. "No. I let people like you convince me intelligence was an excuse for cruelty. That's the thing I'm done with." Rudolph finally looked unsettled. She rose, walked to the cabin door, and leaned on the frame as though gathering the last of her courage. Then she turned to Evan, Jax, and Leo. "Inside my old pack, there's a drive. Everything I ever ran from is on it. People involved, money trails, orders, names, offshore chains. Enough for the government to burn the whole network to the ground." Leo blinked. "And what about us?" Nora surprised them by smiling. Not warm, not relieved, but grateful. "You get to walk away," she said. "There's burner IDs in the drawer by the stove, a map with the blind spots along the ridge, and a letter. If the federal agents stop you, that letter buys you one shot to start over somewhere else. Use it. Please." Jax frowned. "Why help us?" "Because we saved your life?" Evan asked. Nora shook her head. "Because you could have let me die and you didn't, and because I don't want to be the kind of person who ruins every life she touches. I've already done enough of that." Bear trotted to her side, brushing his shoulder against her leg. She rested a hand lightly on his head. The gentle contact steadied her more than anything else had since the cabin fight began. She looked down at him. "You stay with them, okay? Don't worry about me." But Bear didn't move. Instead, he sat, pressed against her knee, stubborn as stone. Jax chuckled. "I think he's made his feelings pretty clear." Nora exhaled. "He always did have better judgment than me." Inside the cabin, she cleared a dusty section of table, set down the encrypted drive, and reached for the satellite phone. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. The face looking back was older than she remembered. Worn, sharper around the eyes, but finally honest. The federal hotline number was burned into her mind. She punched it in slowly. Each ring was like a hammer stroke, each second tightening the knot in her chest. When the operator answered with the clipped tone of someone trained for emergencies, Nora hesitated. Not out of fear of consequences, but from the weight of finally choosing them. She spoke clearly. "My name is Nora Reyes. I have information on Rudolph Weiss, the Mercator pipeline, and several federal-level crimes. I'm ready to turn myself in. I'll give you everything. Just send a team before his people come back." Silence. Then the operator said, "Voice print recognized. Stay on the line. Help is inbound." Nora set the phone on speaker. She walked back outside, the cold biting her lungs, and watched the horizon as if expecting it to judge her. She didn't look at Evan, Jax, or Leo when she said, "I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm not even asking for understanding. I just want this to be the last thing I run from." Evan stepped closer. He looked tired, battered, but not unkind. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." Jax nodded. "Too many people never do." Leo rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Then go through with it. Don't flinch." Nora closed her eyes, absorbing their words like someone collecting the last warmth before winter swallowed the sky. Bear nudged her palm. She knelt, placing both hands on the side of his face. "You saved me," she whispered. "More times than I deserved." His tail thumped once in the snow, loyal, steady, silent, as if assuring her he would stand guard until the very last moment. Far down the valley, the sound of approaching rotors echoed against the cliffs. The federal team was coming. Nora exhaled a long, uneven breath. Her voice came out steady. "Tell them I'm here, and tell them I'm done." The others gathered their gear. They didn't thank her. She didn't ask them to. But something unspoken passed between them, something shaped like respect, or maybe recognition of a choice none of them could undo. As the helicopter emerged into view, Bear stayed planted beside her, determined, protective, a living witness to the hardest decision she'd ever made. Nora straightened her spine, watching the descending aircraft, and whispered to herself, "Time to pay the price." And for once, she didn't look away. The morning fog rolled low across the pines, clinging to the cabins that dotted the remote training compound like ghosts reluctant to leave. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a river murmured beneath thinning ice. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but the quiet felt earned, not given. Inside a small cabin near the perimeter, Eleanor Marsh sat at her government-issued kitchen table, reading through the final paperwork of her new life. The badge on the folder identified her as a retired forest ranger from Idaho. 51 years old, widowed, no dependents except a registered service animal. Eleanor Marsh did not exist 3 months ago. Nora Reyes had died on a snowy ridge the morning the helicopters landed. Not literally, but in every way that mattered to the government agents who escorted her away from the cabin, handcuffed Rudolph, and separated her from Evan, Jax, and Leo with a finality she hadn't been ready for. She closed the file and rubbed her forehead, trying to settle into the identity she had agreed to. It still felt like wearing someone else's skin. Bear lay by the wood stove, chin on his paws, eyes following her with quiet patience. He wore a new harness stamped with the words, "Service Dog," but nothing about him looked restrained or ceremonial. He was a sentinel at rest, always listening, always ready. "You settling in better than I am," she murmured. Bear answered with a slow blink. And then, after a moment, he stretched, padded, across the wooden floor and pressed his head into her thigh with deliberate weight, a grounding gesture that said he understood more than people ever expected him to. Nora leaned down and scratched behind his ears. I know. One step at a time." A knock sounded at the door. Not hurried, just precise. Federal. She opened it to find Agent Lewis, stiff as ever in his charcoal coat. "Paperwork is finalized," he said. "You're officially Eleanor Marsh as of noon today." She nodded. "Any word on the Weiss interrogation?" Lewis hesitated. "Enough to matter. Not enough to worry you anymore. He's held at a black site up north. He won't be seeing daylight for a long time." Nora exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction. More like relief that never fully settled. Lewis handed her one last envelope. This was delivered through a third-party drop. From Canada. "We screened it. No threats. You might want to read it privately." She took it, heartbeat shifting. After he left, Nora sat back at the table with the sealed envelope. Bear sat down beside her chair, ears tilted forward, as if sensing the weight in her posture. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in Leo's sharp handwriting. "Eleanor, the three of us made it across. Papers worked. The ridge map saved everything. Canada is cold as hell, but the kind of cold that feels like forgiveness, not punishment. Evan found work repairing mountain patrol vehicles. Jax got hired at a wildlife reserve. Can you believe that? The guy who once outran a bounty across Nevada now teaches tourists how to respect moose. I'm working boats. Never thought I'd like the sound of water this much, but it keeps my head quiet. More than anything, we wanted to say thank you, not for the documents or the out, for letting us choose something better, and for proving none of us were as far gone as we thought. I hope your new life feels more like a beginning than an ending. You earned that much. Tell Bear we miss him. He saved us too. Leo." By the time she finished reading, her throat had tightened. Not painfully, more like someone pulling a knot loose she had carried for too long. Bear nudged her elbow. She lifted the letter so he could sniff it. His ears perked when he caught the faint scent of the men who had fought beside him. His tail swept the floor once, twice. "Yeah," she whispered. "They're okay. They made it." She walked outside onto the porch, the cold biting her lungs, the horizon stretching wide and clean. For the first time since she entered protection, she didn't feel trapped. The isolation felt like space, like possibility. Bear sat beside her, watching the frost melt on the needles of the pine trees. "We're really doing this," she said. "Living. Not running, not hiding. Just living." Bear bumped his shoulder into her hip. She smiled faintly. The training compound would eventually release her to a small cabin town near the Canadian border, where Eleanor Marsh lived a quiet, retired life with her service dog. She would file trail reports, volunteer with the ranger station, maybe learn how to breathe without looking over her shoulder. Inside the cabin, the hotline phone remained disconnected. No more late-night calls, no threats, no code names, just the slow, rebuilding rhythm of someone who had paid her debts and walked out the other side. And somewhere across the mountains, 3 men were building new lives too. The world had not become safer. But somehow it had become bearable. Bear rested his head against her leg, warm and certain. Nora looked down at him, and for the first time, fully believed the words she'd once said only to convince herself. "It's over, and we survived it." Flathead Valley had a way of swallowing sound. By late afternoon, when the sun dipped behind the jagged Montana peaks, even the wind held its breath. The vast sweep of pines and frozen lakes gave the world a stillness that felt almost unreal, as if time itself slowed down out of respect. Eleanor Marsh stepped onto the porch of her small rental cabin, the boards creaking under her boots. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a truck bed, a yard half buried in snow. But it was hers, a place where no one was hunting her. No one was calling her in the dead of night. No one was shaping her life from the shadows. Bear followed, pushing open the screen door with his shoulder. He settled beside her, lowering his massive frame to the porch with a grunt that carried both age and strength. His breaths fogged the icy air, each exhale heavy and steady, like the rhythm of a seasoned soldier at attention. For a moment, Eleanor simply watched the mountains. Their silhouettes burned orange at the edges, fading into deep blue as dusk crept across the valley. The same valley where she now lived under a name that still felt new on her tongue. Eleanor Marsh, a ranger who never existed, a woman who had killed a past so she could keep living a future. Bear shifted beside her, leaning into her leg with slow, deliberate weight. His fur was coarse under her gloved hand, warm even through the cold air. She felt him breathe, felt the pulse of something ancient in him. Instinct, loyalty, memory. "You know," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You could have run that night. You could have saved yourself." Bear lifted his head. His dark eyes reflected the dying light of the sky. He watched her with the same calm certainty he had shown on the battlefield of snow 3 months earlier, when he charged into gunfire not because he was ordered, but because it was the only thing his heart understood. She exhaled, her breath trembling in the air. "You didn't take the bullet, Bear," she said softly. "You took the chance to save a life." He blinked once, slow and steady, as if acknowledging the truth. Behind them, the cabin was quiet. No radios, no surveillance, no weapons stored in hidden compartments. Just a kettle on the stove and a single framed picture she allowed herself to keep. Bear, lying in the snow after the ambush, eyes open, body shaking, still trying to rise even when the fight was over. He had survived everything meant to break him, and in doing so, he had kept her alive too. A truck engine echoed faintly from the distant road, then faded. Somewhere in the valley, a barn door slammed, and a dog barked back, life continuing, ordinary and untouched. Eleanor inhaled deeply. The air tasted clean, sharp with pine. She almost couldn't remember the last time she breathed without fear tightening her chest. "We made it," she murmured. "It cost us everything, but we made it." Bear nudged her hand upward with his snout until she scratched the side of his jaw. His tail brushed the wooden planks once, a slow sweep like an old soldier saluting. Eleanor turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what comes next. But whatever it is, I hope it's gentler than what came before." Bear stared ahead at the valley, ears forward, the posture of an animal who would never stop guarding the human he chose. Not by command, not by training, by choice. The sky dimmed into twilight. A thin line of gold clung to the mountain ridges, the last light of day refusing to give up its place just yet. For the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to believe in the idea of tomorrow. She sat down on the porch step. Bear followed, lowering himself beside her. Together they watched the final shimmer of daylight vanish behind the peaks. Then, as if remembering something important, Eleanor looked toward the camera of the documentary crew that would one day tell her story. Her voice was calm, honest, a little raw. "You've heard mine. Now I want to hear yours. What's your story with a loyal pet?" She let the question hang in the cold air, not as a farewell, but as an invitation. Behind her, the valley darkened. Ahead of her, a new life waited. Bear pressed his shoulder into hers again, steady as a heartbeat. Eleanor smiled, and the screen slowly faded to black, leaving an echo of warmth in the viewer's chest. If you've ever been saved by a dog, healed by one, or simply loved by one, share your story in the comments, and remember to support the channel. Every view, every like, every subscription helps keep these stories alive. For you, and for every German Shepherd who ever refused to give up, what's your story with a loyal pet?